The cold gnawed at Eleanor's bones like a relentless beast. Her fingers, numb and trembling, clutched the ragged coat she had found in a dumpster days ago. The streets of London had never been kind, but tonight they felt especially cruel. Hunger clawed at her stomach, an emptiness she had grown accustomed to, yet it never got easier. She staggered into a store, desperate for warmth, but was swiftly shoved out, as if she were nothing more than a stain on the city's polished floors.
Hello, I'm the storyteller of the channel, and I would like to ask for a second of your time to subscribe, activate the notification bell, and like the video so that YouTube can take our story to more people who are passionate about stories like this. Thank you, and without further ado, let's continue with our story.
The moment her body hit the icy pavement, her vision blurred. She had fought for so long, but exhaustion was a thief, robbing her of the strength to stand. As the world tilted, she heard voices, indistinct, distant, almost unreal. Then, footsteps approached, deliberate yet hesitant. A man, dressed in a tailored coat that probably cost more than she had ever held in her hands, knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" His voice was gentle, unfamiliar in its kindness. Eleanor's instinct screamed to pull away. No one had ever helped her without a price. Strangers only offered pity, and pity was useless when hunger gnawed at your ribs. "I'm fine," she rasped, though her body betrayed the lie. The man didn't move, his gaze unwavering. "Let me help," he said, his words steady, free of hesitation. She wanted to refuse, to hold on to the last shreds of pride she had left. But the truth was harsher than her pride. She had no other choice. James Anderson didn't know why he had stopped. He had seen countless beggars in the streets, and like everyone else, he had walked past them. But something about her was different. Maybe it was the fight in her eyes, the kind that hadn't yet been extinguished by hardship. Or maybe it was how small she looked, crumpled against the sidewalk, as if the world had chewed her up and spit her out. He knew that look. He had seen it before, in himself years ago. As he helped her up, Eleanor's entire body flinched. She wasn't used to kindness, not without consequences. Her past had taught her that every gesture came with expectations, and those expectations always left scars. Yet, as they walked toward his car, she felt an unfamiliar warmth creeping in her chest. Not from the heater, but from the simple, bewildering act of someone caring. The ride was silent. She stared at the city lights through the window, wondering if this was just another cruel twist in her real story. Would he drop her off at a shelter and disappear? Would he demand something in return later? Her mind spun with scenarios, each one worse than the last. Yet, a part of her, a small, stubborn part, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a trap. When they arrived at the Grand Hotel, she hesitated. The chandeliers, the marble floors, the sheer elegance of it all. It was a world she didn't belong to. She had spent years invisible, cast aside by society, and now she was standing in a place that felt like it had been built for a different species altogether. But James simply held the door open and said, "Come in." And for the first time in a long time, she stepped forward into something unknown. Eleanor woke up to the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the softness of sheets that felt too luxurious to be real. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But as her eyes adjusted to the golden sunlight filtering through the curtains, the truth settled in. This was real. Panic bubbled inside her. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't her world. She sat up abruptly, her mind racing. Then, as if on cue, James walked in, carrying a tray with breakfast. "You're awake," he said with a small smile, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Her walls went up instantly. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, voice sharp like a blade. Kindness was never free. People didn't just help out of the goodness of their hearts. At least, that's what life had taught her. But James remained unfazed. He set the tray down and met her gaze, his expression calm. "Nothing," he said simply. "I just want to help." Eleanor scoffed. She had heard that before. But when he didn't push, didn't try to guilt her, something about him made her pause. Over breakfast, she finally let herself talk. She spoke of the streets, the hunger, the nights spent curled up in alleyways to avoid the rain. She told him about the betrayal, the people who had once cared but left her behind when she became inconvenient. She didn't know why she was telling him all this. Maybe because for the first time, someone was actually listening. James didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just listened. And when she finished, instead of pity, he offered her something she never expected, a new beginning. "You don't have to stay here," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But if you want a fresh start, I can help you." Eleanor frowned. Ow! That's when he made the offer that changed everything. He had connections in the U.S., people who could help her find work, a place to stay, even an education if she wanted it. A chance to rebuild, not out of charity, but because he believed she deserved more than what life had handed her. The idea seemed impossible, like something out of an emotional story she had read in her childhood. But deep down, a tiny ember of hope flickered to life. Leaving London wasn't just about escaping the cold streets. It was about leaving behind the version of herself that had accepted misery as fate. So she took the leap. The flight felt surreal, each passing cloud reminding her of how far she had come in just a few days. When they landed, a new reality awaited her. A modest apartment, a small job at a cafe, and classes at a community college. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. For the first time in forever, she had control. But the world wasn't kind to women like Eleanor. People whispered. Customers at the cafe murmured about how a rich man had rescued her, how she must be taking advantage of him. Rumors spread like wildfire. Gold digger, opportunist, and nobody who got lucky. Eleanor pretended not to care, but every word cut deep. It was ironic. When she had nothing, people ignored her. Now that she was trying to build a life, they resented her for it. Despite everything, she refused to give up. She worked tirelessly, studying at night, serving coffee during the day. James checked in on her, but he never interfered, never made decisions for her. He had given her a door. Walking through it had been her choice. Still, as much as she tried to keep her distance, she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. But was it real? Or was she just another one of his projects, someone he wanted to fix? The question haunted her, lingering in the back of her mind like a shadow. Eleanor threw herself into work like a woman possessed. Every cup of coffee she served, every late-night study session, every exhausted morning was a statement. She was not a charity case. She had spent too long being defined by her past, by the whispers of strangers who saw her as nothing more than a rescued stray. But she was more than that. She was rebuilding herself, brick by brick, and she refused to let anyone, not even James, dictate her worth. James watched from a distance, resisting the urge to interfere. He had given her an opportunity, but this was her journey. He admired her relentless drive, the fire in her eyes when she pushed herself beyond exhaustion. But he also saw the weight she carried, the loneliness she tried to hide. He wanted to do more, to tell her she didn't have to prove anything to anyone. But he knew Eleanor had to come to that realization on her own. So he waited, hoping she would one day see what he already knew. She was extraordinary. As the months passed, their connection deepened. It was subtle, long conversations over dinner, lingering glances when she thought he wasn't looking, the way her expression softened when he made her laugh. Yet, no matter how close they became, Eleanor held herself back. Every time James tried to take a step forward, she pulled away. He could feel it, the fear in her eyes, the hesitation in her touch. She wasn't afraid of love. She was afraid of losing herself in it. Then came the proposal. It wasn't grand or over the top. James wasn't that kind of man. It was quiet, intimate, just the two of them. He looked at her with the kind of certainty she had never seen in anyone before and asked her to be his wife. And for a brief, fleeting moment, she wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe that love could be simple, that she could have happiness without sacrifice. But then reality crashed down on her like a wave. No, the word came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take it back. She wasn't ready. Not because she didn't care. God, she cared more than she wanted to admit, but because she still had something to prove to herself. Eleanor had spent her entire life surviving, clawing her way through the darkness, and she wasn't about to let love become another crutch. She needed to stand on her own first. She needed to know that she was more than just a story James had helped rewrite. So she left. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that made sense. She packed her bags, found a new place, and started fresh again. This time, though, she wasn't running from pain or hunger. She was chasing something different: independence. She loved James, but love wasn't enough if she didn't love herself first. And so, with a heavy heart and a determined spirit, she walked away, knowing that if their connection was real, it would find its way back to her. Eleanor's new life was nothing like before. No shadows of pity, no lingering gazes that question her worth. She carved out her own path, working her way up from a small job to a leadership position in a company she admired. The girl who once begged for scraps now made decisions that shaped futures. But success came with a price: lonely nights, a heart that never quite felt full. She had everything she once dreamed of, yet something was missing, like a melody played without its final note. She told herself it was just an adjustment period, that independence required sacrifice, that the dull ache in her chest wasn't about him. But late at night, when the city lights flickered through her window, memories of James crept in. The way he looked at her, not with expectation, but with belief. The way he had never tried to change her, only to remind her of who she could be. She had left to prove something. But what if she had misunderstood everything? Time passed, and Eleanor's name became synonymous with resilience. People admired her, envied her, wanted to be like her. But none of them saw the truth. None of them knew how often she questioned whether success without love was worth it. She had fought so hard to stand on her own that she never stopped to ask if standing alone was what she truly wanted. Real strength wasn't about isolation. It was about knowing when to open your heart. One evening, she found herself rereading an old letter from James, one she had never responded to. His words weren't a plea or an apology. They were simple, honest. "I never wanted to save you. I just wanted to stand beside you." The weight of those words settled deep in her chest. All this time, she had feared being someone's project, someone's burden. But James had never treated her like that. He had only ever seen her for who she was, long before she saw it herself. Realization hit her like a tidal wave. She had spent so long proving that she didn't need him that she never stopped to consider what she wanted. And what she wanted wasn't a fairy tale rescue, nor a life of solitary victories. What she wanted was a choice to love without losing herself, a choice to stand beside someone, not behind them. And that choice had been waiting for her all along. So, for the first time in a long time, she let go of fear. She booked a flight, heart pounding with the weight of everything unsaid. The girl who once had nothing was now someone entirely different, but one thing hadn't changed. She had never stopped loving him, and now, she was finally ready to do something about it. Eleanor stood outside James's house, her heart pounding harder than it ever had. She had faced hunger, loneliness, and the cruelty of the world, but nothing terrified her more than this moment. What if he had moved on? What if he had decided she was just a chapter in his past, not someone he was willing to wait for? The thought sent a chill through her, but she had come too far to turn back now. She knocked, each second stretching endlessly until the door finally opened. James froze. For the first time, the man who always had the right words was speechless. He had imagined this moment 100 times, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of Eleanor standing there, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and certainty. "Hi," she whispered, a small, hesitant smile tugging at her lips. He could see it, the wall she had built so carefully now stripped away, leaving nothing but raw honesty. And just like that, the past year melted away. Before he could speak, she took a deep breath. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I thought I had to prove something to the world, to myself. But I wasn't running from you. I was running from the idea that love made me weak. And it took losing you to realize that love isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing I've ever felt." Her voice cracked, but she held her ground. "So I'm here. And this time, I'm the one asking, James, will you marry me? For a moment, there was only silence. Then James let out a breath, half a laugh, half disbelief. You're serious? His voice was rough with emotion, but his eyes held nothing but love. Eleanor nodded, her hands shaking as she held out a small, simple ring. I don't need saving. I never did. But I do need you. Not because I can't live without you, but because I don't want to. It wasn't a fairy tale confession. It was real, raw, and everything she had ever been afraid to say. James didn't hesitate. He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, pulling her into his arms as if letting go wasn't an option. Yes, he murmured against her hair. 1,000 times yes. And just like that, the emotional story they had spent years writing together found its resolution. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet certainty that love had never been about dependency. It had always been about choice. Their wedding was nothing extravagant. No flashing cameras, no elaborate guest lists. Just two souls who had fought their own battles and found their way back to each other. As they stood hand in hand, promising forever, Eleanor finally understood. She had never needed to be saved. She had only needed someone who believed in her enough to let her find her own way. And now, with James by her side, she was exactly where she was meant to be,